So we're going to talk about transits, obviously. And with Samuel and I were talking earlier, and I had said that I've lectured on transits for years, and there's all levels to do it. And there's certainly the beginning level of transits. Today, I hope that I might make you think a little differently, or ponder a few other things. Some of you who are accomplished astrologers, it will not be new to you. But as I went through some of my very large library, because not only do I have a large library because I have Gemini rising and I like books, I have been gifted with many books when people retire or pass on, and so I have more copies of some of them than I need. But one of the older books, and it was an old Llewellyn book, had some interesting information. I thought I'd put it in the beginning. They talked about the old traditional age rulers of the planets, and I thought, oh, how interesting. Because as you're looking at periods in your life and transits and timing, I don't know how long it's been since I'd seen this, and I don't even know where it comes from. It was because the book was old and they didn't date where it came from. But in the old traditional age rulers, they say the moon rules from birth to 4 years, Mercury rules from 5 to 14 years, Venus from 15 to 22, the sun from 23 to 42, Mars from 43 to 57, Jupiter 58 to 69, and Saturn onward. So putting that just as a little additional piece into where you fit in that, what planet is going to stand out, whether it gets a transit to it, it gets a lunation, it gets an eclipse. It's an interesting age strike, so I thought I'd put it in there for fun information. There are two arenas, as you all know. There's the mundane and the personal arena. And when we talk about the planets, we all have our language for all the planets. And of course, the outer planets, which are your major transiting impactors, are Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Saturn comes in there also, of course. But talking about the outer planets, Uranus, because they are, of course, higher consciousness, they're not visible, they're part of the modern system much more than the classical and medieval system. But Uranus represents a need for independence, freedom, individualism, progressiveness. It shows one capacity to change, and it calls for change. And we know it has an 84-year cycle. So if we have any new astrologers, I stick that in there. Neptune represents a subtle, gentle nature. It heightens sensitivity. It indicates a need to dissolve boundaries and to erode limits. It can represent a need to go beyond boundaries and the limits of intellectual logic to the ideal, the mystical awareness, and universal principles. So those who are having a Neptune transit have that heightened sensitivity. Their boundaries are being dissolved. They're being called to go beyond. It has, when I teach, I always tell my students, there's a low, medium, and high expression of all of these planets. The lower end is not so pretty. And of course, the highest end is very idealistic, but sometimes not always achieved. The middle is where we hope to land. Pluto, now obviously Pluto is 248 years or 246 or 249. Who do you want to read? Or at what time did they begin that cycle? It represents one needs to control, and it represents power. It can be an obsession or a compulsion to act or to transform. Transform, of course, many of you know Isabel Hickey, either knew her or read her books. I had the opportunity to meet with her and study with her some. And of course, she called Uranus the Great Awakener, Neptune the Great Dissolver, and Pluto the Great Transformer. And those were always stuck with me as good key core words. And I think that astrology is a language. And I think adding to your language, being able to express, being able to communicate, that is important. To understand it's one thing, to be able to communicate it is a gift. It shows capacity to coerce, to push back the limits, to bring to the surface that which was hidden or repressed. Pluto can represent the extremes, and it can bring great personal empowerment if we can use Pluto and its higher power. And that's where free will and conscious information come into play, which is why we study astrology, so that we understand the cycles and the rhythms of the universe, and we can be wiser about our choices. So while we're usually looking at them, and I'm going to look today at some mundane and some personal. Actually, I'm not using a person's chart today. I'm going to use the United States chart because there's so much in it, and I wanted to stay away from individual. But also get the point across just the same. So when we're working with transits, what in a mundane chart or in a personal natal chart, we must first establish the strength and expression in the natal position. And this is important. And so many times, and Lord knows I've been to enough conferences and sat in enough lectures over the years, just like everybody else, hoping that, you're going to gather another pearl that you can put in your basket. But when you're looking at a transiting heavy planet on a natal planet, you first need to understand how that planet's working in the chart. The one that's being hit and the one that's transiting. People will say to me, Uranus is coming in on my chart. And I'm like, well, where is Uranus natally? How does it behave? What's its focus? It's important. So as we go through these, just keep in mind that it's very important to analyze. If you're looking at your chart and you're looking at a planet, natally, how is that planet scheduled to behave, if you would? So some history. All right, now we're going to look at a Mars-Jupiter conjunction here. And of course, Mars is fast. It goes around every 2.2 years. Mars-Jupiter can be optimism. It can be movement. It can be expansion. And Mars is zipping along. That's when Mars comes back to Jupiter, a synodic cycle. And for those of you who are newer to astrology, the synodic cycle is when two moving planets come together or make a relationship. Synodic is both entities are in movement. Sidereal cycle is when one is fixed and the other one makes an aspect to it, such as a transiting planet to your natal chart. And then when does it come back? That would be that's a sidereal cycle. It's repeating at a certain point. When we talk about synodic cycles, Jupiter, Saturn, we all know that Jupiter has 12-year orbit and Saturn's 29. And so right about 19.8 years, Jupiter and Saturn conjunct. It's a 20-year cycle, basically. We know about that. There's a lot of history about it setting pace for governments and the economy and business cycles. So, but it's a 20-year cycle. Jupiter-Uranus now is a 13.8-year cycle to conjunction. Interesting thought. Uranus does not move as quickly. So Jupiter is zipping around and catches it in 13.8 years. And for all of you experienced astrologers, this isn't new, but for some people, they don't realize why these cycles are so very, very different.